Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to this Thursday edition of Establish the Show, Showdown style. No Adam Levitan today, so you're good for at least 2 hours of good content for me and Cody Main here to break down this slate. I kid, but we have a lot to dive into. I'm Gary Hartman, joined, of course, by the one, the only, the great Showdown version king himself, Cody Main. Cody, how you feeling? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. No tech loading behind the scenes today. Sorry for starting a few minutes late. Gary and I were just talking about how excited we are for this slate. Of course, you get Gary, the Giants fan. You get me, the Showdown virgin. And I think together we combine to make a pretty good crew. We were just talking like, Gary, I think that your feel for the Giants is going to be super valuable on this slate because we're projecting a lot of things that we have not yet seen this year. And I think the Saquon Barkley injury and how the team handles that is going to be a big one. And we're expecting the appearance of Wan'Dale Robinson, the debut this season of Wan'Dale Robinson. So I think getting your takes and your feel on how the team will handle those two big key movements in the skill position group will be really important on this slate. So I'm super excited for this slate tonight.
Yeah, looking forward to Wan'Dale pulling a hammy in the third quarter, but hopefully it's enough that he does, as Rob says, that he's a free square. So hopefully he can get you like 3 catches before he does that. Now, in all seriousness, we'll talk all through. It'll be interesting to see what the Giants make inactive in the receiver core. Maybe they carry all 6 guys. I think that's within the range of possibilities here for sure. But let's start let's start macro stuff. Cody, what when you were breaking down, and you have a great Showdown article up right now that is on the screen, when you were researching this article and when you kind of ran the map to see some of this roster construction stuff, anything stand out to you macro wise that you want to talk about?
Yeah, look, I mean, this fits with what we would expect the roster construction utilization table to look like as you see there on the screen. If you're following along, you have a 10.5 point spread. You have a Giants team that has struggled mightily for 6 of the 8 quarters that they've played this season. Now you have Saquon Barkley out. He was ruled out early enough. We're expected to be ruled out early enough that we didn't even get a cheap Matt Breida. We didn't get a cheap Gary Brightwell. There's not a ton of value on the Giants side, and maybe Wan'Dale will open that up a little bit. But you run into the situation where on tonight's slate, the best overall plays and the best value plays are coming from San Francisco. So it kind of converges where you see on the screen 39.3% projected utilization for the 4 49ers to Giants roster construction. That's going to be overwhelmingly popular tonight. And then still 20.9% for the onslaughts. That's really rare to see something projected that high. It might crest above that given the presence of Eli Mitchell. We'll talk about him in a second. You obviously have CMC, a ton of fun skill position players to get excited about, the 49ers defense. So all that to say that I think the 49ers heavy lineups are going to be very popular tonight, and probably for good reason. You can still find ways to get unique within those constructions. And if you're not feeling it, if you're not feeling the 49ers as 10.5 point favorites, if you think Dimes can come out and pull some of that second half magic again in this game, you're going to get paid off with really low ownership on some of the Giants heavy stuff. So I would consider that in large field tournaments for sure. Be thoughtful about those types of constructions. But just because you're seeing, massive projected utilization of these particular constructions with the 49ers heavy stuff, I wouldn't completely rule them out. There's plenty of ways to get different if you're playing into the 49ers heavy stuff. And we'll try and talk through some of those on the show today. But you're seeing kind of your traditional 10.5 point spread in this table here.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say constructionally, it's possible that the Niners still cover the spread or come close to covering the spread. And it's something more like a 3-3 or 4-2 to the Giants, only because most of the value is coming on the Giants side. If game script's saying, hey, they're playing from behind, it's just compiling into those low prices, right? Like we talk about Wan'Dale. Take aside Daniel Jones and Darren Waller, everyone on the Giants is cheap. Breida, I guess, is appropriately priced as the lead back. And then, value-wise on the Niners, we really don't have much unless Ayuk is out. Unless we're going to expect a lot more Elijah Mitchell, which we'll talk about. There's not that much value there. So you could see something where like CMC and Debo or CMC and Purdy get there, and then your other 4 guys are kind of compiled up cheap players from the Giants. There's weird stuff like that could happen. So something to consider when pricing is so low on so many skill position players on one side.
Yep, totally agree. And you brought up a good point. Like that, you don't even need to expect the Giants to cover the 10.5. The scoring could just work in a way where you need that value from the Giants side in order to make constructions work. And so for those reasons, you can see some of this 3-3, 2-4 style stuff work, even if the Giants do go out and lose by 10 to 14 or something like that.
Exactly. All right, let's dive into quarterback here. Two interesting names. One at the top there in Brock Purdy, who's looked excellent to start the season. Exactly what Kyle Shanahan and company would want of him, and that is to, game manage, but a little extra. I think he's done everything he's needed to do so far. He is $800 cheaper than Daniel Jones due to Daniel Jones' dual threat ability. Purdy's stacking options are cleaner than Daniel Jones are. I would argue that his ceiling is lower, despite the fact that we see the exact same ceiling projection there. A little bit more ownership on Purdy. How are you handling the quarterbacks here tonight, Cody?
Yeah, I think Purdy's like true 99th percentile raw ceiling projection is lower than Daniel Jones, but I think the reason you're seeing it the way it is tonight is simply because he's a 10-point favorite at home. Yep. You mentioned it. The skill position players are much better for San Francisco. He is at home. He is a 10-point favorite, kind of everything else pointing in his direction tonight. And I think at 9,400, I've kind of bemoaned this point on other shows, and I've bemoaned it on Twitter as well. Like, DraftKings is just simply pricing down quarterbacks this season in similar spots last season and the years before. I think Brock Purdy probably would have been 10, 10-2, maybe 10-4 as a 10-point home favorite against a pretty unimposing defense with Ayuk and Samuel and Kittle and CMC and all these guys around him. He just projects too well to ignore. I think he is absolutely a cash game must tonight. And I think the 59.8% total ownership in tournaments is pretty efficient. The one thing that I don't often say, though, I think maybe the 11.2% projected captain ownership is a smidge high. If I had to take a stance there, I'd probably come in a little bit lower in tournaments. I'm just more into the raw upside that we're getting from some of the skill position players on his team that we'll talk about in a second here. But I like Kittle, like Debo. If Ayuk does go, I like Ayuk at reduced ownership. Of course, we're going to like CMC. So give me Purdy in cash for sure. Give me Purdy in flex, most likely in tournaments.
Interesting. Yeah, actually, let's sidebar for a second and talk about this Ayuk thing, since chat is talking about it. Right now, we are projecting him in. I do think there's a chance that he plays and is limited. I think that's well within the range of outcomes, but there's certainly a chance he just misses as well. Is there any docs on Ayuk's projection right now, Cody? And how do you handle this? Depending, say we don't get news till inactives or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think we have any docs on Ayuk's projection as of right now, and I talked about it a little bit in the article as well. But we've talked about this with the Amari Cooper situation on the Monday night doubleheader. Like the tone and the timing of these reports it doesn't seem like it would be, but it's hugely impactful on what his ownership will ultimately be. If we get news at like 5 Eastern that he's going to be in, he's good to go, no lingering issues, then you're going to see probably a pretty normally owned Brandon Ayuk. If we get maybe 60 minutes before kickoff that he could potentially be limited, or another wide receiver happens to get called up or something ridiculous like that, then suddenly we'll see reduced ownership on Brandon Ayuk. We'll probably have to make some projection adjustments at that point. But I hate to give a cop-out answer. This is going to be one that ETR subscribers will need to keep an eye on closer to lock. We'll, of course, have a final ownership update. We'll also have a final projection update once we get inactive. So it'll be hugely important, the timing and the tone of that final Brandon Ayuk report.
Yeah, Cody, I was just going to say, I think we have him on a main event team that we got to remember to either take him out or keep him in. Right. So we can't screw that up. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's a great breakdown on the Ayuk side of things. Let's go back to quarterbacks here and talk about Daniel Jones. Was very happy as a Giant fan to see the second half that I saw, which was absurdly. I mean, listen, any opponent you feel good about, 250 passing yards, 50 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, just the amount that he was able to do. Obviously, it was against Arizona Cardinals, who a lot of people consider the worst team in the league, but you're happy to see that kind of production and kind of that kick in the ass of that offense, against any opponent. You hope that they can take that right in. They have not traveled back east. They've been out west all week. I'm sure, 10.5 points, game script calls that they might be playing from behind here. If that's the case, I know San Francisco has a ton of blue chip talent on defense, but if that's the case, we might get a lot of Daniel Jones scrambles in the second half as well, which just boosts up that floor ceiling combo so much. To me, he's a cash game lock, and at ownership right now, I feel pretty good about getting over the field in tournaments. How would you be handling our guy, Danny Dimes?
Yeah, look, it's still a scary click. I get it. But it's a click that I think like you said, you have to make in cash game contests. He just provides too much of a floor and ceiling combination to get away from at his 10-2 price tag. We'll talk about plenty of the value options that we have to allow those types of things to fit with both Purdy and Daniel Jones. Of course, we'll probably want to get to CMC in cash as well. I think the one concern that this Giants team wants to be run heavy. They just haven't been allowed to be run heavy yet to this point because of the early season game script. They're 15th in pass rate over expectation. They're second in situation neutral rush rate at 57%. They've just been forced to drop back so much because of negative game script, and that might be the case again. And like you alluded to, that's a great thing for Daniel Jones, who is one of the best runners in the league at the quarterback position. And if that forces him to scramble more or forces him to call his own number more because Saquon Barkley is out, I think that's a great thing. He's got a 25% design rush rate. He's got a 13% scramble rate. If you're going to give me that amount of rushing at the quarterback position, it's going to be really, really, really tough to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the run pass split stuff with them is interesting. Like, I think ultimately they probably want to be neutral-ish or even a little bit pass heavy. But the problem is their offensive line from pass protection situation is so bad that they're really trying to, in the run game, they're not nearly as bad. So they're trying to be efficient on the ground, but two, they're just trying to use the run to set up the pass ultimately. And like they're doing whatever they can to get that to happen. Tonight, I question the ability with, Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, and a really strong San Francisco defense. I question that. So we'll see what happens from a run pass split perspective there. Okay, I think that was a good breakdown on quarterback. Let's talk running back here, and it starts with the most expensive player on the slate. And Cody, you were saying, I think, fifth most expensive charted skill position guy you've ever charted on Showdown for Christian McCaffrey here at 13-2. It's not keeping the field away, though. 85% total ownership, 24% captain ownership. I think the running back conversation and really the skill position conversation tonight begins and ends with Christian McCaffrey. So take me through your CMC thoughts.
This is going to be a really fun one to see when the cards flip tonight at 8:15 Eastern. When what is Christian McCaffrey actually going to come in his captain ownership? I could see anywhere as high as 30 to 35%. When he was 13-4, which was the highest we've ever charted Christian McCaffrey, and the second highest skill position player ever. He was 13-4, projected for right around 28 DraftKings points. You see, be about 4 or 5 points higher than what we have tonight. He came in at 90% total ownership in that contest and 38% captain ownership. So I think there's a huge range here. And the reason why I think it could potentially be lower than 24.1% is because of some of the coach speak stuff that we've seen from Shanahan, and Levitan's tweeted that out. It's been kind of circulated. So I think it's present enough in people's minds that there might be some concern that Shanahan actually is going to pull on the reins quite a bit on Christian McCaffrey after playing 100% of the team snaps last week. And he's racked up 48 rushing attempts in the team's first, or 48 total touches in the team's first 2 games. This just seems like a natural spot. Short week, couple of days rest, 10.5-point favorite against the Giants. It seems like a really natural spot to kind of bring in Christian McCaffrey a little bit and trying to keep his legs fresh for the remainder of the season. And that would kind of parlay itself into why we're seeing such a big projected ownership on Elijah Mitchell as well at 2,400. Now, keep in mind, obviously, we're taking some stances here based off of his projection and based off of what he did last week. Mitchell, that is. He didn't play an offensive snap last week, but you're seeing we're projecting him for 5.4 DraftKings points this week. Kyle Shanahan said that last week's running back rotation was a mistake and that Elijah Mitchell should have played more. So I think we should kind of bank on that, and we should expect to see more Elijah Mitchell in a game that projects to be run heavy. So for those reasons, you're going to see Elijah Mitchell pop as a really good value on tonight's slate at 2,400. I think there's a lot of downside risk there, just in case they do continue to trot out Christian McCaffrey as a legitimate bell cow, one of the few remaining bell cows in the league. But I believe Shanahan when he says that he wants to kind of pull in CMC a little bit. And that doesn't make CMC a bad play, but I think it will ultimately result in him being a little bit overowned relative to how often I think he finds the optimal lineup at the captain position if he is going to come in at 24.1%.
Yeah, a couple of things here. One, of all the things that we've seen so far in this early 2-week season, maybe only Puka Nacua is more surprising to me than Christian McCaffrey's ultimate usage that we've seen in the first 6. I mean, it's been insane. If we knew we were getting this kind of CMC usage, he would have been the consensus number 1 overall pick over Justin Jefferson. That's the kind of usage we're getting out of CMC. So I think that he is the engine to their offense ultimately, and they've rightfully now going into the full, knowing they have him for a full season, rightfully built their team around him. But I don't know how sustainable this kind of usage is. Now, what I would do as like a big tournament player is I would boost Elijah Mitchell and not Christian McCaffrey lineups. I would sprinkle in a captain Elijah Mitchell. I know somebody in chat was asking that, like very small sprinkle, maybe around the field type of thing. But you want to cover the spot, right? If you think that one of those two guys is getting there, if you believe in the Niners, the the Giants have not shown an ability to really stop the run effectively. And in fact, one of the reasons I also like Purdy tonight is their defensive line has just been disappointing in general to start the season. I think that it's fair to assume one of those Niners running backs will be heard from tonight, price aside. So anyway, something to consider. Cody, do you want me to give you my Giants running back shtick before you kind of dive into some of the numbers and ownership stuff here?
Yeah, and you mentioned the 49ers stuff being one of the toughest spots one of the spots we need to get right tonight. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I think we need to get this Giants spot right, and
okay,
I really think no one better than you to break it down. We were discussing off air. We're kind of joking, like I don't think fandom really helps in the fantasy analysis space, but you being a professional DFS player, you being a fantasy analyst, and you being as in tune with this team and the beat reporters and the coaching staffs, I think it actually matters here. So the people should be listening to your Giants running back take.
Okay, I appreciate that. All right, so Breida's the RB1. I think it's pretty clear. And he should have the most opportunities. And before I get to Gary Brightwell, I just want to touch on Eric Gray. So there's a chance Eric Gray gets some base down work tonight. I think they got a better chance than maybe we're even projecting and maybe the industry's projecting. I'm trying to find a little bit more on if like anyone else is taking punt and kick returns, because if they are, I think that means that they have some base down work in store for Eric Gray. Here's the problem with Eric Gray. He can't pass protect for his life. So if this game gets out of hand quickly, he will not be out there. Like I think early on, maybe, so say Breida gets the whole first series, even if we got Eric Gray base down before we saw Gary Brightwell in the game, I wouldn't be that surprised. But if this game gets away from them pretty quickly, Brightwell is the guy that might see the most overall work because he's an excellent pass protector. I think they trust him on all three downs. And overall, if you do want to play this game as if they're playing from behind, I would take that ownership discount, take that price discount from Breida, and kind of settle in on Brightwell as my favorite of the group. It's a little ugly. And Breida, if you're trying to find a guy that's just going to they're going to try to make into Saquon, which it's not going to happen. They're going to split this roll up. It would be Breida. But Brightwell is kind of the guy that I think they will trust the most with what Vegas thinks the spread will be. Gray's the punt in the large field. I think there's a chance we get 2 to 6 carries here in Gray in the first half. And if he does something with them, it's possible. But yeah, as Ozzy said, really bad matchup right in between the tackles for what they would try for Gray there. So Brightwell to me, is a very interesting play. And, in week 18 last year, when it was just these two, it was a little bit of a closer split than people expected with Breida and Brightwell. And, again, Brightwell's a great special teamer, someone that they trust just to kind of stand up in the trenches and, block these Nick Bosa types if they get around the edge, at least throw a clip in there. So Brightwell making the team after being out for all of preseason was definitely something. After Corbin was so impressive in the offseason stuff, they trust this guy. So it's something for sure. Breida's still a smaller dude. This is a vaunted defense. I think there's a chance we get the most Brightwell in the second half. It's just a hunch.
Yeah, and it kind of fits with what is going to end up being like game theory optimal in terms of roster construction as well too, right? I think all three of these guys are slightly under-owned relative to how frequently they find optimal lineups. Brightwell being the guy that is probably the most under-owned. And at 5K, where he's kind of priced around the 49ers defense, where he's kind of priced around some of these wide receivers, you have the kickers you can go to as well. I think Brightwell is certainly going to get overlooked. You see us projecting 6.1% total ownership. I don't think we necessarily need to go there in the captain position on really any of these guys. But Brightwell at 5 to 6% ownership in the flex, I think should probably end up being closer to 9, 10, 11, 12% likely to make the optimal lineup. And I think just as a direct price point pivot off some of the guys that are going to be way more popular in this price range, I like Brightwell from kind of a math perspective on that.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you said this might be the spot that you need to get right. I think I disagree with you just a little bit on that. I think there's a strong chance none of these guys are optimal, and if the Giants playing from behind, we'll talk about some of these receivers that are just the low ADAC guys instead of the dump offs. And because if the Niners are shutting down the run and the Giants playing from behind, then again, it's a spot that you need to at least have it parsed out in case of just touchdown variance. So there's a chance somebody falls into the end zone here. Yep. Dave mentions Breida as a revenge narrative. That's true. Breida started his career with San Francisco. So something there. I think Breida's price, his ownership, that all looks efficient to me. I don't think any of that's wrong with what we expect the roll to be tonight. He's just fine. So anyway, that's my shtick. And I think Gray's a fine punt because again, I think they are going to try to have him in there on some base down work. Terrible matchup, but I think they're going to try to give him a couple carries base stuff behind Breida. So,
and look, these are the spots that you want to get paid off with not only just a price discount, but you want to get paid off with an ownership discount. If you're taking a stance that you think is something different than what the market is projecting, you absolutely have to get paid off with 2.1% projected ownership, and I think that's absolutely going to hold on somebody like Eric Gray. So if you disagree a little bit with our projection, or you disagree with what the market is kind of projecting Eric Gray to be tonight, you're going to get a spot to be paid off in a big way. And, Dink talks about that. What do you win when you win? What do you win when you're right? That's one of those spots with Eric Gray that if you're right on his projected role, you could win in a big way.
Yeah. I mean, my only thing with Gray is like, and I could be wrong on this, but I'd be shocked if he's in on any clear passing downs. So, your upside's a little bit limited, but the price is there for you. So, okay. I think that was a good breakdown on running back. If you guys have any questions about that spot at the end, we can try to break it down more. All right, let's talk Niners receivers first. We hinted a little bit out of it with Ayuk. We don't really know his status. But if he does go, we are getting a huge discount on Brandon Ayuk compared to Deebo Samuel here, half the ownership. Only a 1.5 less ceiling projection. We saw what Ayuk did in week 1, much less captain ownership, like just GPP bro brain, assuming we get the news that he's in, like that looks like a fantastic pivot play there. How do you handle something like that when he's hurt? And what are your thoughts on Deebo tonight as well?
Yeah, I'm building it straight up as of right now. I've kind of set my rules, my soft rules and groups in the solver as of right now. And I'm kind of expecting him to be in and expecting him to maintain the same base projection, ceiling projection, and kind of ownership that we're projecting right now. I think, like I alluded to earlier, if we get that report early that he's going to be in, if anything, we probably need to boost that captain ownership a little bit. We probably need to boost that total ownership a little bit as well and pull maybe some from Deebo. But if this split's going to maintain, I'm willing to take a few shots on Ayuk being his normal self. And if I'm going to get paid off with a 2-to-1 ownership discount in the flex, and I'm going to get paid off with, a 3 or 4-to-1 ownership discount in captain, then I'm going to have a ton of interest in Ayuk. As a whole, the reason why I'm a little less excited about Captain Purdy than maybe others are is because of how awesome all these wide receivers look. I think even at 12%, there's a little bit of wiggle room there on Deebo. I think he's probably more optimal more frequently than the 12% ownership is indicating. And same thing for George Kittle. We have him at 5.7% projected captain ownership right now. I think that should be closer to 8 or 9% in terms to how frequently he is optimal. And it just sets up a great spot if you want to try and find some direct leverage off of CMC. How does CMC fail, or how does CMC fail to produce enough points to pay off a 13.2 price tag? Well, maybe it's because one of these wide receivers or tight ends ends up going nuts. So I like just collectively taking shots on Deebo, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk.
I agree, because we've seen it with all three of these guys. Like when they break a slate, they break it hard, right? We see like all of them have massive ceilings is basically what I'm saying, right? We've seen Kittle do it over the years. We've seen Ayuk now do it over the last year and a half, especially in Deebo. When Deebo goes crazy, he goes crazy. I would just play the ownership game a little bit here. I love George Kittle tonight, I think. And I know it's so easy to say that. I feel like we always say it on these primetime games, and we just are waiting for Kittle to have these breakout performances 3 or 4 times a year. But man, if Ayuk's less than 100%, I feel like the Giants haven't been able to stop a tight end since like 1986. And, it's the ownership looks pretty good there as well. So Kittle's my favorite, I think, in a vacuum. Well, not in a vacuum. In a vacuum, I guess it's Deebo. Kittle's my favorite with slate context there, plus just kind of narrative street for you. Secondary guys, I guess the Juwan Jennings thing is completely dependent on Ayuk, right? On how that profile is. If Ayuk was ruled out, how chalky do you think a Juwan Jennings would get here?
Yeah, I think he would end up becoming quite popular. I would imagine that Ayuk's target share gets fairly evenly distributed to Samuel, Kittle, Jennings, maybe a little bit more to CMC. But then I think Ronnie Bell's kind of the next man up. And at $200, we'll talk about one day in a second here, but I think at $200, Ronnie Bell becomes kind of the wide receiver 3 on the perimeter. And then they keep Juwan Jennings kind of in his slot role that he's played for a majority of his career in San Francisco. And I think Ronnie Bell could end up becoming kind of the popular punt option as the de facto wide receiver 3 in San Francisco. And we've seen Ronnie Bell in a very small, very limited preseason sample kind of be able to ball a little bit. And I think the team likes him. The team is actually giving him some opportunities, even with Ayuk in there. I know Ayuk played limited snaps last week, but I think it kind of sets up for a spot if he does get ruled out that we might turn our attention to Ronnie Bell a little bit.
Interesting. Any interest in Dwelly or Warner here as punts?
No, I'm not even certain. Like when I set up my rules, these guys were included because they have a projection greater than 0. But I'm not even sure that McLeod, Dwelly, and Warner should really even make our large field GPP pool.
Yeah, especially if you have a free square on the other side, potentially not a guaranteed free square, but potentially a free square in Wan'Dale Robinson, who will update that. He should have a projection. I believe he's going to play. Let's talk about this as a whole. I mean, we'll talk about Waller in a second. So it's been Campbell, Slayton, Hodgins in their base sets, right? Campbell's been in the slot, low A dot stuff. Slayton, you go read Cody's article for the Slayton numbers, but he has been the de facto wide receiver 1, leads them in all target, receiver target share, air yards have been pretty juicy as well. And then Hyatt's your kind of upside punt play here. We'll talk about all these guys in a minute. Chance Sterling Shepard's inactive because Wan'Dale Robinson might come back tonight. So the only thing that I wanted to kind of expand upon on the running back side before we dive into these guys individually is that there's a chance that both Wan'Dale Robinson and Paris Campbell, maybe Jalen Hyatt on like an end around type of, gadget play, but Wan'Dale Robinson and Paris Campbell straight up get some carries. Like there's an outside chance, right? Wan'Dale, I don't know what their plan is with him tonight. I think they want to get him some touches on his first game back, and I wouldn't be surprised if they scheme up some low A dot stuff. Well, he's a low A dot player anyway, but some really low A dot stuff just to get him both comfortable and to kind of like operate as a run game if the run game isn't working. So I think he's definitely interesting at 200. And I guess he would eat into Campbell the most, and so would Jalen Hyatt if he gets a little bit more work, which I'm kind of expecting as well, especially if they're trying to kind of throw things against the wall in a game that they're underdogs by 2 scores. So that's my kind of macro take on the receiver front. Let's dive into all these guys, Cody. We'll talk about Waller second, but any thoughts on Campbell, Slayton, Hodgins here, or Giants receivers in general?
Yeah, and I think if you hit a refresh, you'll be able to see the Wan'Dale projection. I think the team got one in there on him. Yeah, we're projecting 2.0 base points right now. We'll get the ownership projection updated as well. Once we get the market kind of updating for news. But at two base projection at $200, he does kind of, definitely not a free square by any means, but he does kind of become the viable punt option if you're really looking to try to jam in those studs, CMC at captain and Daniel Jones and Brock Purdy and all those guys. He kind of becomes the one guy that really makes things fit. And like you said, reading into this a little bit more, it sounded like Wan'Dale probably could have gone last week in Arizona. And the only reason he didn't go last week was because they knew they had the short turnaround 4 days later on Thursday night. So they felt like, or at least the beat reports are suggesting that they felt like Wan'Dale had a better opportunity to play in San Fran and then get the 11 days off before week 2 to kind of rest up and recoup. So if you want to believe that narrative a little bit, Wan'Dale's probably pretty ready to be back. Does he immediately step into a near every down role? Probably not. Do they manufacture some touches for him as an extension of the run game because Saquon Barkley is out? Maybe. And I think at $200, that's a pretty good way to go about things. The San Francisco defense is obviously very, very good, but one area where they have been beaten is to the slot position. They have given up the league's most DraftKings points to opposing slot receivers to start through week 2, and they're getting targeted by slot receivers at an extremely high rate. So I think if you're looking into that narrative, these low A dot Paris Campbell / Wan'Dale Robinson type players might be the way to attack the San Francisco defense. And it kind of fits that natural build as well, right? Like if we expect the 49ers to get out from ahead, then you're going to be looking for some of those short area A dot targets to rack up that PPR volume in kind of garbage time. So I do like Paris Campbell. I do like Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm curious where this ownership projection is going to land, but those are the guys that kind of fit the matchup / volume role for me. It was actually third most DraftKings points to opposing slot receivers, 31.6 per game through 2 weeks on a 29.8% target rate to the position, that according to Fantasy Points data. So those are the spots that I like. And you guys know me, if you've listened to me for any period of time, you know that I like these high A dot wide receivers at low projected ownership. Darius Slayton going to fit that bill again. I don't know if I can go back to the well there, because like Gary, I do think that Jalen Hyatt at some point, the Giants coaching staff just has to realize that he's probably their most explosive player, and they need to get him on the field more than they have through week 2. went 2 for 89 on 2 targets against Arizona last week, kind of, jump started their offense. And it seems like they're probably going to get him more opportunities at some point. The only problem here is he's just a little bit overpriced. Even if he does take a leap in terms of total routes run, you really need to bank on like a long reception or a couple of long receptions or a touchdown for him still to kind of pay off that price tag. So keep that in mind. It's going to come with low ownership, but you're just asking a lot at 5,200 for him to take a huge leap in terms of his overall role.
Yeah, he was incredibly efficient with his very limited opportunities through 2 games, passing the eye test in every way, for sure. And I was just reading a article from Art Stapleton of The Record, I think does a good job on the Giants beat, and he was expecting, I think, then Giants to make sure Hyatt's out there for a more of a snap share this week. I don't know if that comes at the expense of Campbell or Hodgins. I think Slayton's pretty safe. Now, I wouldn't play Hyatt and Slayton that much together because how many big plays are the Giants completing against this Niners team, right? So that's one where maybe I would do a negative correlation. Hodgins is kind of like if there were to be a non-Darren Waller safety blanket for Daniel Jones, like he's more of a possession guy, doesn't get that much separation, but does an okay job with his opportunity. So he's just fine when he fits into your lineups. He's the most expensive of the group, so I do prefer Slayton in a vacuum. Art also said that he expects Paris Campbell to straight up get a carry or 2, it sounds like, with Wan'Dale back. Wan'Dale coming into the slot on those snaps, maybe Paris Campbell in the backfield a little bit. So they're going to get unique. Wan'Dale, Paris Campbell, I'd have negative correlations on. Sterling Shepard as well if he made your pool. And then Slayton and Hyatt. Hodgins, I'd kind of just let roll. He's kind of out there on the outside. If you wanted a negative correlation on Hyatt with him, you can, because there's a chance Hyatt takes some of his snaps. But that's kind of my shtick on the Giants receiving core. I like Hyatt. I think Hyatt's it's so bad at 5,200. It's a good play, especially with anticipating more work for him personally and the big playability. So
yeah. Kai brought that up. Yeah, he's overpriced. He absolutely is. But that pricing from DraftKings is going to result in lower ownership. So if you want to take those shots, again, if you're going to make these plays where it is so bad that it needs to be good, you need to get paid off with really, really low ownership. And at 5.1%, you're also getting that.
No Saquon, like the amount of explosiveness on the Giants field is basically Daniel Jones, big plays, and Darren Waller. Like, Slayton has a couple deep shots a game. Like Hyatt's the guy that could like break open the defense. So it's something to consider. Waller side of things, predictably been the top target so far. Looked pretty good, especially in that second half last week. They're lining them up all over the field. 7,400 ownership seems efficient if you like the Giants in this game. To stay competitive, I think a lot of that has to come on the back of the Waller-Jones connection. What are your thoughts on Darren Waller here?
Yeah, it looks pretty efficient in terms of his projected ownership and his captain ownership. You're really looking at him in comparison to, a lot of the wide receivers / tight ends on the other side of the ball. And I think we all like George Kittle. We all like Deebo Samuel, assuming that Ayuk is ruled in. I think he's a little bit under-owned. So at some point, you do have to kind of make some stands. It looks pretty efficient to me. I will have, a wide-ranging portfolio of lineups tonight, so I will have some Waller at captain, but nothing immediately stands out here. We know he's going to be the de facto wide receiver 1, certainly the top target in this offense, and that's probably going to result in a healthy amount of target share. He hasn't been used like a traditional wide receiver, traditional tight end, I should say. We know that he's kind of running his routes all over the field, and I think that's good for him in terms of this offense, potentially, scheming him into open spots for running 41.8% of his routes from the slot, 25.4% out wide, and 31.3% in line. I think if anyone can scheme him open, it would be Brian Dable and Mike Kafka. So hopefully they can do that. They're going to need him tonight with no Saquon for sure.
Yeah, George asked if I think there's any chance the Giants play Bellinger a little bit more because Waller is a horrible blocker. I don't think Waller's snap share is impacted in any way, but I do think 12 personnel is certainly more in play with the Giants offensive line issues, with the 49ers front seven, like that's all in play. So Bellinger, you wish he was 200 like all those other guys. And, I kind of recommended him on that game where no one on the Giants was doing anything against Dallas a couple of weeks ago. I think he's just okay. He'll be out there. But you have some of these other 200 options. I think that maybe I prefer more starting with Wan'Dale. So I think that's something to consider there. Anything else on any skill position guys, Cody, that we missed?
No, I think we can get to some of those questions. I see some of them streaming in. If you guys have questions, you can start firing those in as we go through DST and
defensive
kicker.
kicker.
But we'll get to remaining skill position questions at the end here.
Go ahead, Cody, on the Niners D, because that's kind of its own thing tonight. 5,800 projecting really well. Good amount of ownership, 6% captain ownership as well. So how are you approaching them?
Yeah, look, man. I mean, it's a great play. It really is from just like a pure matchup slash, do you know ball type take. Like they're 10-point home favorites. They have one of the most talented top to bottom defenses in the entire league. They've dismantled better offenses than this Giants one. You have a left tackle and a starting guard that are out. You have Daniel Jones, who is very, very capable of making mistakes and is very turnover prone as well. It's from just like a do you know ball perspective, this is an absolutely phenomenal spot. However, I think we and the general public tends to overrate our ability to predict fantasy defensive performances. And look, Daniel Jones could have a bad game. The Giants offense could have a bad game, but if they don't turn the ball over or don't generate turnover worthy plays or give up a bunch of sacks, you could just have a game where the Giants win or where the 49ers win 28-7, maybe have a couple of sacks, maybe a fumble. And the 49ers defense doesn't really do a ton. If they find their way into the end zone, that's a whole different story. But you're really looking for those big plays to be generated, like we saw in the Pittsburgh-Cleveland game where you have the pick six or a bunch of fumbles, bunch of sacks. And to be quite honest, those are very tough to predict and very, very, very volatile. Now we're seeing the 49ers defense come $5,800, which at this point you're starting to compare them to some very good skill position players, and 30.9% total ownership, 5.9% captain ownership. And I think if anything, we might be on the low end of that. So just keep that in mind. Are they a good on paper play because of the matchup and because of everything that I just mentioned? Absolutely. But the field agrees with you. And so if you're playing them into pretty high ownership, you're playing them into a big price tag. And it's just not generally a spot that I'm willing to go to.
Yeah, I think that was a great breakdown. Before we talk kickers, Giants defense, largely disappointing up to this point in the season, right? There's a front set, especially the defensive line, the pass rush that people are excited about. No Azeez Ojulari for them tonight. Kayvon Thibodeau's been bad. Not great. But if you want to paint the prettier option, you like what you saw in the second half against Arizona. This is a different beast going into San Francisco against a good offensive line. But you're getting paid off with very little ownership. If you want to take a shot, listen, Purdy has been not very mistake prone, but you just never know. There's enough randomness there that you're getting a big discount on salary from the other defense in this game. Barely any ownership. You literally never know. I think it's fine at their ownership. I would play them at least around the field, I think.
Yep, I agree with that. And real quick on kickers, like Jake Moody, I think is as close to a cash game lock, as ridiculous as that may sound, as like Daniel Jones and Brock Purdy are. There's just not a ton of skill position value that you can feel really confident in. And at 4,200 with a 27.5 point team total, like if you expect the 49ers to get there, Jake Moody's going to be busy. And if this team happens to stall out in the red zone, you get a 30 to 40 yard field goal, a couple of extra points, that may be enough because there's just not a ton of really appealing skill position value kind of in that price range.
Man, Vegas hates the Giants tonight. You said 27.5 team total for San Francisco. The Giants are like down at 16.75 or something. It's brutal. 30 second least of the entire week, only behind the in front of the Arizona Cardinals, I should say. I think that does it. Oh, Gano's fine. Moody a much better play with everything we just said with the team totals and spread and everything. Gano, if you want to plug and play at 4K, I'd rather the other 4K options on this slate. I'd rather find the 5,000 for Gary Brightwell. I'd rather take some of those Giants receivers or even Juwan Jennings or something if I'm playing in that range personally. So, what kind of questions do you want to take here, Cody? Do you have a best sub 4K cash option? Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, we'll do FanDuel Run in a second.
Yeah, best sub 4K cash option is give me all the pricing on the screen here. Yeah, I'm guessing it's probably going to ultimately be Elijah Mitchell. I would need to see like extremely positive reports on Wan'Dale Robinson, like something to the effect that he's going to play full-time role in order to really trust that. I saw some notes that he might be a free square. He's an okay play. He's a good play at $200. There's much worse you can do at the stone minimum. But this is a first game back from an ACL injury. and we don't exactly know what his role will be. So I think from a skill position perspective, if you're going that route, I think Eli Mitchell is probably the best sub 4K cash option.
Let me ask you this: if Wan'Dale had 2 catches for 10 yards at 200, which is I think firmly in play.
Yeah.
What does the construction need to look like for that to be optimal? You need like those high end guys to be going off, and you need all your salary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if somebody that scores 3 DraftKings points is going to be optimal, he's gonna be optimal because he was required to fit all of the other guys that went off, and that probably means like the mid tier really failed in a big way, which is certainly possible. Like the Slaytons and Isaiah Hodginses of the world failed in a big way, and then you needed all that salary relief to get up to CMC captain and Brock Purdy and Daniel Jones and things like that, which is certainly possible. But if I knew before the slate started that Wan'Dale went 2 for 10, I would just exclude him from my build.
Okay, fair enough. And I think there's a higher ceiling than that, but I think that's kind of his median outcome tonight, personally. FanDuel run through. You got a chance to take a look at any of this here tonight, Cody? We have it up on the screen here. But,
I did a little bit, and kind of the general spiel that goes with FanDuel is you have to be a little bit more cognizant if you're playing the large field tournaments about how your rosters are constructed, because you're very likely to dupe, because of course you don't have the 1.5x salary multiplier. You can just kind of play the best plays, if you will, at the captain position, and most people will try and do that. So don't think you can get away with like a CMC at MVP plus Purdy plus, and so on and so forth. You really have to be cognizant of how you're constructing your teams. The one thing that stood out over on FanDuel to me was George Kittle looks like a very, very good value over there, where he's only 9K. I mean, just comparing him to like Darius Slayton, who's 8,500, Paris Campbell, who's 8K. George Kittle looks really underpriced over there and pops as one of the best values to me. And it's also kind of a format that fits him better, right? Like those big George Kittle games are going to come from some long receptions. They're going to come from finding the end zone. And that's generally a slightly better format for him over there. So I like George Kittle. Brock Purdy also looks underpriced at 14.5. You have CMC up there at 18,000. You have Daniel Jones at 16,000. So I think dropping down a little bit to Purdy with this favorable offensive environment is another good spot to go to. So those would kind of be my 2 from FanDuel that look a little bit better over on FanDuel than they do on DraftKings.
Cool. I think that's a good one. Other questions here. Somebody was asking about how would you at all feel comfortable playing naked Daniel Jones against a 49ers defense? And I also saw a question before about a 5-1 Niners build with Daniel Jones as the one giant. How do you feel about those type of constructions?
Yeah, I've gotten so much 5-1 5-1 Giants or 5-1 49ers with Daniel Jones on the other side that I'm starting to fear that it's going to like become a kind of popular roster construction. And I'm okay with that if you have Daniel Jones in the flex. I think it's way less likely to happen with Daniel Jones at captain. Right? Like if Daniel Jones puts up a captain-worthy performance, it's extremely likely that he's carrying at least one teammate along with him. Does he have to? Absolutely not. Could he run for 100 yards and a touchdown on his own and end up being the optimal captain because the 49ers production is really spread out in a 5-1 onslaught? Sure. I just think that you're trying to thread a really fine needle there. And for me, if I'm playing 5-1 stuff, I most likely want my bring back to be a wide receiver. Would be okay if it's a pass catching running back, or of course Waller as a tight end, kind of a pass catcher with that respect. But because of Dimes' rushing upside, I don't mind him as a flex in a 5-1 bring back.
What about playing naked Daniel Jones against Niners D? I mean, you don't make too many rules against that, right? In Showdown.
No, I don't rule it out. I do think on this slate, though, Daniel Jones is still 10-2, and he still needs a pretty big ceiling to beat the other guys that he's priced around. Again, can he do it with his legs, solely with his legs? Sure. I think the pricing on his skill position players, though, is such that you probably want to pair Captain Dimes with at least one wide receiver or tight end from New York.
Awesome. Thoughts on Bell? Go rewind. We talked about Ronnie Bell during the 49ers receiver section. We think he's an interesting $200 punt. Thoughts on fading Jones and San Fran D? I guess both kind of captain if you fade both of those spots. I think, honestly, personally, I think one of those two is optimal tonight. I think, but I really do. So I think either you want to play Daniel Jones or you want to play San Francisco defense in most lineups. I understand the idea of fading them both. I think that's when construction gets a little bit weird. But they both seem like, I think most scenarios have one of those guys present personally.
Yeah, I'm terrified. I just know that the way that I play with kind of the way that I like to play correlated rosters while finding other ways to get unique, that is ultimately going to get me onto a lot of like pairing wide receiver with quarterback and trying to bring run backs from the opposing side. And when those slates don't happen, I generally tend to lose. And that's happened quite a bit to start the season. I can just tell that the way that I'm going to play, the way that I generally play, is going to lead me underexposed to the 49ers defense. So congrats to everyone.
Which I think is fine. Which I think is fine. Like, I just think in lineups that I don't have Daniel Jones, I'd rather have the San Francisco defense type of thing. Like, I think in those, personally, I agree.
There isn't a negative thing from just like a matchup / football perspective. There is not a negative thing you can say about the 49ers defense. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's going to be so high owned. Like if we flip the cards in the Millie tonight and it's 35 to 40%, I would just say, yeah, I mean, that seems pretty reasonable.
Yep. Agreed. Anything else here? Sirens during Darren Waller discussions. Is that a bad sign? It's either a good sign or a bad sign. It's whatever you want to take of it.
This is not like the Jerry Bark. This is not the Jerry Bark.
No. Favorite leverage play tonight? For me, it's Jalen Hyatt. I think he's super fascinating as a leverage play in kind of any kind of construction. So he's not my flag plant because I think that's a little bit too cute personally, but I love him as a leverage play.
My favorite leverage play, and it won't give away my flag plant, though it's kind of in the same vein, and maybe we can parlay that directly into flag plants.
Go ahead. You take it away.
Yeah, Brandon Ayuk. He's not my flag plant, but it would be specifically captain Brandon Ayuk. Like if we're gonna play Brandon Ayuk and expect him to be fine, then I think I would just want to take advantage of the extremely low captain ownership there. And if we're assuming he's fine, then I think he's optimal way more often than 3.5%. So I think he's the best overall leverage spot. I'm just not totally convinced that he's 100%. So that will not be my flag plant. I will go directly to my flag plant from Brandon Ayuk. Yep. I love these 49ers wide receivers. I think it's good leverage off of CMC, who is likely to come in around 25% projected captain ownership. I think it's even pretty good leverage off Brock Purdy, who still benefits from the wide receivers playing well, but I think he's going to be more owned at captain as well. I would prefer that Brandon Ayuk is ruled in for this flag plant to work, but if he's ruled out, hopefully too much ownership doesn't funnel in George Kittle's direction. He's third on the team in target share through week 2 with a 17.3% target share, fourth in air yard share at 10.6. Not really all that inspiring, but the Giants defense allowed the 7th most DraftKings points to inline tight ends last season. That's where Kittle runs 55.2% of his routes. This season, they're at the league's 2nd highest inline target share, 23.1%, according to Fantasy Points data. So I think this is a good spot. Kittle's been very quiet. We've seen big games from Ayuk. We saw a big game from Deebo Samuel last week. If they want to pull back the reins a little bit on CMC too, like maybe there's just a few more opportunities for these pass catchers, and maybe this is a good spot to get George Kittle going against a tight end funnel defense.
That's where I was going. And I think that's the right captain. The right flag plant in tournaments tonight. Crypto makes a good point here. Only problem with Deebo is not great versus man coverage. Generally, that's where Ayuk feasts. It's a good point. And we know Wink Martindale wants to play man. And not only that, the outside man guys for the Giants are both rookies. So something to consider if Ayuk plays. I think he's a very interesting leverage play, as Cody mentioned. All right. I don't want to go Giants flag play, man. Last time we did this, you went Slate and I went Waller. The Giants lost 40-0. I can't go there again. All right. I am going to go Elijah Mitchell then. I think Elijah Mitchell, I'm going to buy into the hype a little bit. It's super cheap, 2,400. The ownership, I think, is totally fine. We're getting, even if it's not the same type of usage we were seeing out of Elijah Mitchell last year when they both split time, I think we're getting more tonight as 10.5-point favorites. The Giants have not shown an ability. I mean, James Conner was running pretty efficiently on them, especially in the first half last week. Pollard ran all over them in week 1. I'm expecting more things from this run D ultimately, but if game script's in that favor, I think Elijah Mitchell just might have some volume there at the end. So Kittle, I co-sign on Cody's Kittle flag, but Elijah Mitchell would be my backup. And I think I gave a bunch of other guys I like tonight too, but I'm not going on the Giants side of things. All right. Cody, anything else to add? We're right at
No,
50
I
minutes.
love
Not
it.
bad. Not
I
bad.
love it. This was a good breakdown. We kept it under an hour. I got your takes on the Giants, which is going to inform some of the decisions that I make in the solver. Be
Hopefully
sure
not
if
too
you
much.
guys are ETR subscribers, make sure you do check out the breakdown. Hopefully went through a little bit more detail there as well. And that will be where you see this chart that has our fantasy point and ownership projections. Those will be made final at some point around the time inactives are released.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, is this free for everyone right now? Yeah, this is free for everyone. Yeah, go to establishthedrun.com. Check out everything we have going on over there. If you're watching this and you're not a subscriber, at least do us the favor of giving a thumbs up and subscribe on this channel. We would appreciate it very much. But you're missing out not subscribing to all the great things we're doing over at ETR, including Cody gearing up for a Ryder Cup in a couple weeks, I think. Cody, you excited for that?
Do not remind me. we're playing the Kazoo Open, which I think is like the French Open today, and I've got about 55% exposure to golfers that I have no idea who they actually are before last night.
And that's the beautiful thing about what you do. All right, for Cody, I am Gary. Good luck, everybody. Good luck to me and my sanity tonight, and we will see all of you on probably Monday. With another Showdown show. I will not be able to do Sunday night, Cody. So telling everyone live on air. If anyone wants to do Sunday, maybe Cody will do a solo show, but probably Monday. Probably Monday. All right. I'll stop rambling. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good luck tonight. See you soon.